Okay, so I think it's been announced on the main stage, our panel. So I'm now going to kick off in this session. So welcome everyone to the panel for environmentally conscious exhibition planning in the contemporary art market. Before I start questioning my co-panelists, I've been asked by ArtSwitch if everybody here could possibly write in the chat why they chose this particular panel and what your particular background and perspective is on the topic, because they're just keen to get a kind of sample about what everybody's kind of preferences are. So if everybody who's joined our panel could just possibly just jot in why you're here and who you are, that would be fantastic. But without further ado, I'm going to begin. So this is exhibition planning in the contemporary art market, because of course the bulk of the conversation thus far has been about galleries and institutions, public galleries and institutions, but here we're talking about art market initiatives. And I have with me, as has been I think introduced by Johanna, Heath Lowndes from the Gallery Climate Coalition, which was founded in London. I'm also actually on the founding committee, founded in London, an organisation of commercial galleries who want to be more sustainable. We now have a carbon calculator to help calculate carbon effects and to be more environmentally conscious. And also we have Laura Lupton and Estrada from Galleries Commit, who are based in New York. So rather than me rather haphazardly talking about you, I'm going to get you to talk about yourselves. If you could just give a very brief 2-minute introduction, each of you, just about what your organization particularly is, because there's different emphases within each of the organizations, although of course we're all fighting for the same ends. And just very quickly, also what I'm going to say is that we're talking about exhibition planning in the contemporary art market. Obviously at the moment with COVID, exhibitions are all online, it's all in virtual viewing rooms. We're going to be talking more about the post-pandemic situation, when even though John did say that pandemic practices will endure, pandemic practices hopefully won't be all online. Post-pandemic, we'll be going back into analog spaces. So that's what we're going to be talking about in terms of organizing exhibitions. So if first of all, Heath, you could tell us a little bit about Gallery Climate Coalition and your role within it, please, and then Orlando, and then Laura.
Great, thanks, Louisa. Yes, I'm Heath Lowndes. I'm co-founder and managing director of the Gallery Climate Coalition. The GCC launched in October following a year of research and planning by a collective of individuals from London's art community. And we came together after realizing that there were really no specific resources available to help commercial galleries reduce their environmental impacts. And that led to the formation of the coalition. We aim to improve sustainability in the art sector by providing industry-specific and science-based guidelines and targets. Our primary target being the reduction of CO2 emissions by 50% by 2030, which is in line with the Paris Agreement. We also hope that the GCC will become the leading international lobbying group for environmental issues within our sector, and therefore able to facilitate significant systemic change. The GCC is a non-profit membership organization. We are funded by voluntary donations, but it is free to join as a member. You don't have to pay to sign up. And since launching, we've had over 280 members join. The initiative, as Louisa mentioned, started in London, but it is very much an international group, and we do encourage members from all around the world. Our tools and resources are relevant to artists, individuals, businesses, as well as commercial galleries, so it's really open for everyone. And in addition to that, I also work at Thomas Dane Gallery here in London, where I'm responsible for program coordination, exhibition management, artist liaison, and publications.
Now, Laura, perhaps you could tell us your role within Galleries Commit.
My name is Laura Lupton, and I am one of the co-founders of Galleries Commit. I'm joined with Orlando Estrada, who's also one of our core team members. Galleries Commit is a worker-led collective committed to a climate-conscious, resilient, and equitable future for New York City galleries. We emerged in 2020 really out of conversations that were happening between gallery workers with a shared concern around the climate crisis, and being really interested in experimenting to see if it was possible to co-create an art world that we wanted to be a part of in the future while operating within our current roles at galleries. Galleries Commit has always had a focus on building community, sharing knowledge, and responding specifically to what individual gallery workers need in order to help co-create the change that our galleries are making, and specifically thinking about what that looks like for New York City. We launched in 2020 with an open commitment letter, which is still available on our website for signatures at galleriescommit.com if you want to sign on. And that letter did a few things. It acknowledged that there is a climate crisis and the way that climate crisis intersects with racial, labor, and other forms of structural injustice. It gathered ideas for action, resources, and data about where our galleries already were with climate action. And it also commits individuals who sign to, one, think critically about action they could be taking within their current roles, two, speaking up about proposing alternatives when engaging with colleagues, artists, vendors, institutions, collectors, to really normalize those conversations in our spaces. And three, listing your name publicly on that site so that others can identify you as an ally who wants to be engaging in these types of conversations to collaborate on finding better ways to do things in our galleries. After spending last year really building community within that network through a series of dialogues and conversations, Galleries Commit currently maintains a community platform of workers, artists, and allies from over 60 galleries in New York City. We primarily function through a monthly meeting, a Slack chat, and an email list. We also have a database for climate action taken by our community that's available on our website, along with resources to support that action. And we maintain a collective large-scale land conservation partnership with Art to Acres to empower galleries to collectively come together for a large-scale climate action. Orlando, I'm going to pass off to you, who is a fellow core team member and can speak a little bit more about us.
Hi, everyone. My name's Orlando Estrada. I'm a visual artist based in New York, and I'm also a gallery worker for a large international gallery. Laura gave a really good explanation of who we are in Galleries Commit, but I guess I should say that I feel that my role in Galleries Commit is kind of unique as both an artist and a gallery worker. And so I see my position there kind of as a bridge between studio practices and what we're doing within galleries.
Thank you very much, Orlando. I mean, we're all coming from the commercial sector here, and I'm a journalist, so I'm not actually involved in a gallery myself. But the three of you, you work in galleries, you're involved in galleries. Previously, the conversation's been very much around the institutional sector. I'm just curious to know what you feel, if you could drill down a bit, as what you feel the particular contribution the commercial sector can make in establishing new codes of practice, specifically in the planning and conception of exhibitions. What can you do to augment what the public institutions are doing in their exhibition planning? How can we lead by example? Laura, over to you.
Yeah, I love this question because I think that galleries, and specifically primary market galleries that are working with living artists, are uniquely positioned to be able to make some rapid and radical change with only the buy-in of a few individuals. The artists, the gallery owners, the workers have real accountability to make those decisions, which is different sometimes in an institutional space because institutions have slow-moving bureaucracy with boards of directors, publics, missions with official statement charters, and exhibition planning schedules that are often several years in advance. Galleries have a lot more flexibility to be nimble, and therefore we have a lot of opportunity to experiment very quickly, sometimes experimenting things that are successful or less successful, but in spaces that we have kind of fast turnover exhibitions, we're working with living artists, there's a real collaborative and generative spirit there. And I think it's also really important to note that commercial galleries are often, we're the entry point of work that is entering the market, which means we're the entry point of work that is entering circulation. So in these exhibitions that we put on, we kind of set the ground zero framework for what the standards of exhibition are for those works, what the ongoing terms for circulation, maintenance, conservation, loans, displays can be. And so we have a huge opportunity to be in direct dialogue with our artists, our collectors, our advisors, to really set paradigm expectations for what those works can be, consult with our artists to help them understand ways of either generating that work that's a more climate conscious production approach, but also thinking about their installation manuals, ongoing sales terms that can really introduce from the inception point of these works on a lifelong cycle of circulation that are embedding climate conscious principles from the get-go as they move into institutions for ongoing display.
So to be more nimble, faster, and to establish good paradigms right from the word go with the artists. Heath, what do you feel about that? What can you add to this with anything else at all?
Yes, I mean, I would definitely echo what Laura's just said. I think certainly in the UK, the commercial sector is playing catch up, and the institutions have done a huge amount of work in this area, particularly Tate, who've made some really good progress and are setting the standards for others to follow. I think I definitely see the tide turning in the commercial sector, and more people are paying attention to the issues and really trying to make a difference. I mean, as Laura said, obviously compared to institutions, galleries are less restricted in their operations and their spending and can make decisions much quicker. But I really see the commercial galleries as the linchpin in the art world, connecting artists and suppliers, institutions, the auction houses and the collectors. So they're just really well positioned, and I think that fluidity really puts them in a unique position where they have the potential to instigate the required change very quickly right along the chain. And I think reaching out to suppliers and putting coal under their feet is a way that perhaps the institutions can't do, being a bit more pushy and a bit more demanding with new products and services.
Yeah, lobbying perhaps is a key thing, that, you know, we can get that critical mass. Orlando, what do you feel?
I agree with both Heath and Laura. The gallery is this bridge between artist and collector, and just the fact that within a gallery you don't have bureaucracy, you don't have to wait for board meetings to make things happen, and a lot of the times relationships between collectors and artists and the galleries are more personable. And I think that using those friendly relationships can really shift the paradigm in a way that's a lot more productive than an institution can do. I also see the gallery, as it's been said before, as the starting point for a real holistic ecosystem in terms of environmental concerns.
I mean, you are an artist. An earlier panel Alice was talking about environmentally responsible artists and curators working together. I mean, I've seen artists, you know, from Olafur Eliasson doing major projects to Gary Hume insisting that his paintings are only shipped by sea and not by air. You know, and Fiona Banner joining forces with Greenpeace. I mean, artists are very actively, directly or obliquely, really making waves in this direction. I mean, how do you feel within the commercial sector with this very direct interface with artists? How do you feel the artists are leading the move? I mean, Orlando, you as an artist, how are your compadres facing the environmental crisis? It seems that oftentimes it's the artists who are actually taking the lead and putting the pressure on the gallerists and indeed the curators.
Yeah, one of my closest mentors once famously said that artists are the most powerful people in the art world. And specific,
no art world without them, would there?
Yeah, there would. Like, galleries don't operate, exhibitions don't happen without the artworks. So maybe I want to bring up like two really concrete examples of this. Helen Mira, for example, uses a climate writer for her exhibitions, which states, you know, things like no acrylic paint, carbon offsetting, and kind of lays out these parameters. And basically, if an institution or a gallery doesn't abide by the writer, the exhibition doesn't happen. The artist Peter Halley, if you go onto his website, he incorporated into his practice is carbon offsetting. And there's a really informative page, like I said, on his site where anybody can go on there and see this. Beyond just visual arts, there's a music festival called the Helsinki Flow Festival, which is a carbon neutral music festival. And they also provide a sample climate writer for anybody who is a performing artist that they can adopt into their practice. And yeah, it's like you said, artists really are the starting point where these initiatives can then be implemented and passed on.
Let's cut to the chase a bit here then. I mean, how working with the artists, but also thinking about this panel is about planning exhibitions, but conceptually and practically. I mean, how do you think, right from the word go, you have to put what systems you have to put in place? What do you feel has to be put in place to really make a tangible change? Laura, what do you feel are the first building blocks that should be put there?
Yeah, something that really came out of our conversations last year with the Galleries Commit community emerged with a few core tenets of when you're planning an exhibition or thinking about your gallery practices as a whole. From the get-go, the number one thing that you can do to reduce your climate impact when you're thinking about exhibitions is to plan ahead. planning ahead gives you the time needed to make smart decisions around consolidated shipping or sending things by sea freight, to think critically about what waste is going to be generated from that exhibition, how you can minimize last minute overnight shipments, how you can figure out working more holistically and thoughtfully about how you're sourcing and disposing of that waste after the exhibition through exhibition material afterlife checklists. We also found that some of the core things to begin thinking about from the beginning, in addition to reducing emissions and minimizing waste, are also thinking about ways that you're supporting your staff, recognizing that your staff needs time to think about and take climate action, and also that your staff needs to be in a workplace that's free of racism, harassment, inequity, and they're being compensated with fair wages and benefits, so that energetically they're able to show up to be excited to take climate action within their spaces and outside of the gallery for that matter.
So when we're talking about social justice, we're talking about economic justice, environmental justice, providing a workplace where people can actually feel free to express their opinions and have their rights and considerations taken on board. I mean, this is practice. So that goes hand in hand with logistics, it seems.
Yeah, I think when you're thinking about planning climate conscious exhibitions, then it's the same mindset, like an extractive mindset for the climate is the same as an extractive mindset for labor. And so figuring out how to shift those paradigms and really introducing those conversations from the beginning so that you can plan ahead and make sure that you're approaching these things with integrity holistically is what's going to set us up for the most long-term success.
Heath.
Yeah, well, where I work at Thomas Dane Gallery, we commissioned a carbon audit, which gave us a really valuable insight to exactly where the areas of most concern are. And unsurprisingly, the vast majority of emissions were directly related to exhibitions or art fairs. And nearly half our emissions came directly from shipping artworks to and from exhibitions via air freight, and that was for a year was nearly 100 tons of CO2. And after that, the biggest culprit was individual travel, again by air, which is around 40% of emissions. And the majority of the remainder percent was building energy. So with those three categories, we can really see clearly where the damage is being done. And after that, we can make a plan to reduce them. So for shipping, which is our primary concern, is moving the majority of our shipments to sea freight. But that's not going to be possible for everything. So where it's not possible, making sure that it's at least consolidated. And then for travel, we've got to redefine what we consider essential travel, and also think about the types of transport we're using. So obviously we can't do it at the moment, the world's not operational, but thinking ahead for next year and asking ourselves the question, if we have to take 4 trips to New York a year, could the same amount of work be done in 1 trip? Or if people have to go to Basel for the art fair, could they take the train instead of flying? So it's really asking these questions, finding out, knowing your information, and then finding out where the changes can be made. But I think really the very important first step is to understand where these emissions are coming from and to take responsibility for them. And we did that with an independent auditor, but the GCC has developed a tool on its website, as you've already mentioned, Louisa, the carbon calculator, which for free and with relative ease, people can get that figure themselves. And that's really, we think, the first step towards making reductions.
So getting the data, basically, and finding out and pooling the data. I mean, I think these concrete scenarios. Also, there's been a lot of talk about not just the carbon footprint, but also packaging, about lobbying shippers to actually state that there is an option to go by sea as well as by air, lobbying insurers. I mean, how do you feel about these kind of nuts and bolts practices? Because I feel that, conceptually we can talk very generally about these things, but there was a lot of talk also in John's panel about, containers, packaging, shipping, building exhibitions. All these things are very, very, environmentally unfriendly. Laura.
Yeah, all of those things are true. And I think that I would echo again the idea of planning ahead, giving us time to, there are packing solutions that are less wasteful. There are ways that even not upgrading to better materials, that if you have more time and you do things, Orlando, I think, has a great thing that he recommends of always having courtesy tabs when you're doing packaging. And when your team has enough time to sit around and make those courtesy tabs and pack things more thoughtfully, then you can reuse that packaging material on and on into the future. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done around lobbying and increasing resources, materials, and infrastructure available to us to empower us to really make like the long-term major shifts that are required. But there's also ways that by slowing down and even just entering in the conversation within your gallery team or institutional team, inviting your artists to collaborate on those conversations with you from the get-go, that if you make it a priority, there are ways to capitalize on the existing resources to be more thoughtful in the way you're utilizing and moving forward with those materials.
So being more thoughtful and also making, sorry, Heath.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in. I think that something that is to be stated is that in the United States, we don't have a high-speed rail system. And when you talk about lobbying, I think that maybe that's one of the goals that as the art world, that's somewhere where we can put our voices. I think that it would be a great solution if we can ship artworks domestically by high-speed rail rather than trucking in order to reduce carbon emissions.
And what about future plans? I mean, a bit of blue skies thinking. You know, we can be very pragmatic about, you know, courtesy tabs on our packaging and planning ahead. But any thoughts in our post-pandemic world when, you know, when we've got to start being more considerate and more thoughtful and mindful and more collegiate? Heath.
Should I jump in there? Yeah. Well, I think John had some really good ideas in his presentation, and there really are so many things we could be doing. I would definitely encourage any solutions to be based on collaboration, whether that's internationally or locally, because it's going to be so much easier to implement these changes if we're doing it together. I think, for example, something like establishing circular networks in cities or regionally for galleries to reuse and to share exhibition materials and equipment. So we're not just producing objects like plinths that last for 6 weeks, the duration of an exhibition, then chucked in landfill, which just seems insane. And everyone I speak to is fed up with that and wants to make a change. So I think there might be a gap in the market for a business or a charitable organization to maybe operate in the same way that an AV rental company does, where they loan out reusable modular exhibition walls or plinths for exhibitions. I don't think this exists in London. I can't find anything, but I'm sure there might be examples around the world. So if anybody knows of anything, please do let me know. Another idea that I would like to see is, we were talking about offsetting, and it's a very difficult subject, and it's complicated and it can be shady, and in some cases it could do more harm than good. But I really like this idea of insetting, which would allow for a system of sustainable investments within our own network and our own supply chains, potentially raised by an internal carbon tax. So rather than being this abstract, invisible, distant thing, insetting would actually be tangible and direct. And that might mean galleries coming together to invest in compostable or reusable packaging materials, or green delivery vehicles, or reusable exhibition furniture. But just for me, it makes sense to keep that investment within our sector.
Yeah, and I think the whole notion of offsetting is a very vexed one, because we would talk in Gallery Climate Coalition endlessly about this in the GCC, about actually investing in systemic change rather than reactive, actually being proactive about these things. I think it's something that's very key. I think I'm now going to move across two questions because the chat box is filling up fast, and I think there's an interesting question which covers a lot of the things we've talked about in different sort of degrees, which is about the panel, about you three imagining a post-pandemic art gallery practice without art fairs. Art fairs often seem to be the elephant in the room, which people talk about, you know, the art fair causing so much, you know, environmental disruption with everybody flying across the world to these various different art fairs. But also the people who run the art fairs say, well, actually it's a one-stop shop, and you get a lot of gallery experience and a lot of air miles for your experience. But of course, you know, they do use up a great deal of resources in their own right. Can I have some of your thoughts about art fairs and about the kind of the waste that art fairs generate, but perhaps also the fact that they could perhaps be, you know, improved in their own right as well? I'll pitch that to Laura.
Yeah, I think the art fairs, I mean, the pandemic has given all of us an opportunity to reassess what our participation in art fair looks like, what makes sense for our business models, and what they will look like moving forward. And I think that art fairs sometimes get either credit or accountability for their carbon impact and their practices. There are ways that you can have an art fair that are thoughtful, conscious, and sustainable. There are ways that you can participate in an art fair that are not conscious, thoughtful, and sustainable. So before just saying that it's like art fairs are the problem or that participation in art fairs is a problem, then there are ways that we can approach those business models and approach our participation in them that are more thoughtful. And I would argue that that starts with having thoughtful conversations within internal teams, both on the art fair side and the gallery side, thinking about what it looks like to not just prioritize the like constant role of participation in as many things as possible because that's become the standard expectation, but using this pause that we've had over the past year to really think critically about what makes the most sense and how to participate in a way that doesn't just prioritize it doesn't just prioritize participation for the sake of participation, but is also participating with climate impact as a priority and like ongoing sustainability and resiliency and circular economies being a priority.
And also the fairs themselves actually being environmentally conscious. I mean, Frieze have switched to biofuel. They take carbon audits. Actually, you know, way back over a decade ago, Frieze did the first carbon audit. So it's the fairs themselves being more sustainable. Heath, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you're right. They do need to take responsibility and make it easier for the participants to reduce their impact while still taking part. I think perhaps the answer might not be get rid of art fairs, but maybe have more art fairs, more regional centres, so people don't have to ship things as far or travel as far, and they can be just as vibrant and profitable, but just in a local sense.
And also to be more, I mean, I go back to this collegial. I don't know how you feel about a greater sense of sharing resources in the chat box. In fact, in my notes as well, I was going to refer to, apropos what you were talking about, Heath, Barda Art, a resource for material sharing with all things art world, plinths, frames, any material you can post things for free. I mean, that's a really interesting initiative. This sense of galleries, I mean, during the pandemic, commercial galleries, you know, previously trade rivals, have actually become trade colleagues, and that could then roll across to more of an environmentally aware sense of collaborating and sharing. Just the fact we formed a gallery coalition and you've formed Galleries Commit, galleries joining together for the same cause.
Yeah, and I think that a key thing that I would point out for those is the way that those things really work in tandem. And like Barter Art is created by a Galleries Commit community member, one of our core team members, to really be a Craigslist specifically for the New York City art community, with interest and also expanding to a more like global or national network if it makes sense. But I think that highlights the way Gallery Climate Coalition has like a very international focus and has really been focused on developing some tools that can facilitate international global arts climate goals. And Galleries Commit has always been kind of focused on like our New York City network and building connection and community so that we can have conversations specifically about what's happening within our spaces and with our neighbors. So something like Barter Art is able to come out of that and really create some cross-pollination. And I think that those two spaces, I mean, it's been great having Gallery Climate Coalition and Galleries Commit and some other networks that are evolving, like the Art and Climate Action Group out in San Francisco, that can both be aligned in these global big picture goals that we all need to be working towards, while also focusing on our neighbors and local communities and what makes sense for the regulations in our cities or the networks that we have in our cities. So that kind of like collective collaboration while also local focus, I think, is a really key two-pronged approach to make sure we're making ongoing progress.
I've also got quite a few people in the box and quite a few curators talking about, you know, organizing exhibitions Zero Waste at the Museum of Fine Arts in Leipzig, but also about museums and commercial galleries working together, exchanging ideas, the sense of the public. I mean, the fact that we're here from the commercial sector in a seminar organized by an organization that deals with institutions. So this kind of institutional interface. Do you have any thoughts about how we can more increasingly work with public institutions, perhaps lobbying collectors particularly, I was thinking? Heath, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think lobbying is a really important part of coming together and having a network, international network who are operating on the same commitments and same targets. I think I've had conversations with institutions here in London who keep saying the same thing. They feel like their hands have been tied, and there's requirements set out by the insurance companies and the collectors who are loaning the works, and which means that they can't implement the changes that they've pledged to. So, for example, HVAC systems are incredibly energy hungry, And the current standard cooling systems for art storage have been proven to be, to a large degree, unnecessary for the majority of works in contemporary collections. So we could collectively, with the institutions, via the collectors as well, lobby the insurance companies, ask them to relax the regulations around climate controlled storage. And that's just one example, but I think there's so much we could do together. I think building a symbiotic relationship where we share resources and share innovations is really, really the way to go.
I've just got a note here from Laura Phillips about smaller regional museums in the UK also being more nimble, being forced to recycle. In a way, the smaller museums and galleries, and then the commercial galleries, in a way, have more synergy, it seems to me, in terms of scale and in terms of actually needing to be resourceful, because it's, as John pointed out, it's actually economically viable to be more sustainable on many occasions. And to have that kind of feeling. Orlando, what do you feel about the sort of resourcefulness of commercial galleries? The fact that commercial galleries can be more creative in that respect, because they're not hidebound by bureaucracy and by protocols and procedure in the same kind of way.
Yeah, I want to go back a little bit to where we were talking about art fairs, and I can't kind of get away from the idea of the climate rider. And maybe one of the resources that galleries can use to their advantage in that particular instance is having an art fair rider, and maybe pairing with art fairs that are also willing to oblige by these specific parameters in order to create fairs that are more ecologically conscious. And then I also want to consider maybe that we have to reconsider the art fair model completely. Maybe it's not that they don't need to exist, but maybe they don't need to exist as temporary setups, as temporary spaces. My mind goes back to the idea of the World's Fair and the idea of pavilions that can be used in various ways. Maybe these things are public parks or convention centers that host regional exhibitions, and also going back to a more regional model. And I think that galleries can really be the key players here.
And lead the way. Any thoughts, Laura? Any thoughts on
that? Yeah, I echo Orlando and echo again. I mean, galleries have a lot of power, artists have a lot of powers around art fairs specifically, and like entering into that dialogue and speaking up, sending letters, sending invitations where you're like inviting people in to participate in that conversation with you. There's like a level of accountability to that when you have a art fair rider or a climate rider, but like also allowing for that rider to not just be a tool for accountability, but an invitation to collaborate and like acknowledge that we're all allies in this. I don't think you'll see a single person like in the art world right now who actively says, I don't want to take any climate action and actively going to refuse to do this. It's just like, it feels overwhelming, it feels expensive, it feels like they don't know what to do. So inviting people into the dialogue to co-create these solutions is like, I think, the most important way to move forward.
And dealing with collectors also. Heath, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, as I said, the institutions feel like they've hit a wall sometimes with the way that collectors make demands. And it's, as Laura said earlier, it's this paradigm shift. We really have to instigate a change of how we think about this, and the timelines and the planning ahead is so important. And if something takes 2 weeks longer to get there, but it's 95% less carbon, then that's the choice we have to do. We have to reevaluate what is the good life. And this expectation that everything happens last minute and there's a culture of last minute decision making, that needs to change. But I think that won't happen until everyone understands the issues and everyone's tuned in and had the opportunity to be educated on it. So that's why it's so important to be working, singing from the same songbook as it is. And yeah, I think that's going to be the domino effect. That means that everyone's aligned and everyone's working towards the same goals.
Interesting questions popped up from Alice Odwin in the chat box about the content of art, about green art, green generation of artists working with environmental issues. In the past, weren't so market friendly. It was difficult to get any kind of traction within the art market if you were making that kind of work. I know quite a few kind of activist artist friends of mine who found it difficult actually to make a living, selling their work as well as doing commissions and so on. So what are your thoughts about there being a change a sea change in the art market, where these artists making this kind of work are going to have more traction within the market? What are your thoughts on that? I'm going to ask Orlando, as he's an artist himself.
Hi. So yeah, I think that the world is really opening up more to activist artists, and we've already seen the shift with institutions and galleries showing more Black artists, showing work that deals with issues of social justice. And I think it's important to remember that climate justice is social justice, and all these issues are interconnected. The most marginalized people in the world are the ones that are most affected by climate change. And I think that everyone is kind of focusing in on this kind of work right now. So I just hope that there will be more of it shown and more of it being created.
Just to jump in there, I totally agree, and I think that's a great point. But also to say that not every artist can be an activist artist, and not every artist wants to make work that's radical, but that doesn't mean that they can't have influence over the subject matter, and they can pressure galleries and they can pressure collectors to make positive changes, even if they're not outwardly outspoken.
Yeah, I think Alice talked about that in her earlier presentation, that when you're doing a climate exhibition, it's not necessarily just the content of the work, but it's also how you're approaching creating and displaying that work. And artists is like, what's interesting about artists is that they're creating work that's challenging questions about all the big issues of our time. And climate is obviously one of those that should be engaged and picked up. But there's also ways that any work could be a sustainable work. It doesn't just have to be like climate and content that's sustainable.
Well, on the GCC website, we have a film with Gary Hume, who makes paintings, in fact, oil paintings, which is not the most friendly of substances. However, in a way, perhaps to offset in the broadest sense of that, he's made the decision not to have any of his works ever shipped by air ever again, which means he has to finish his deadlines much earlier. He has to change his whole schedule of making, but it's doable. So his work isn't specifically about climate in that respect, but his practice is. And I think it seems to be this joined up. What's coming up in the chat box is very much about joining the dots across the board. Also interesting, there's quite a lot of talk about shipping companies not shipping smaller crates. There's loss risk, and also the sense of shipping companies and insurance companies saying that they're going to be higher premiums for shipping too. So again, this could be a sense of us having to lobby shipping companies and work with shipping companies to perhaps state our terms. What are your feelings about that? Have you come up against?
I would say we are in the process of developing more resources on this specific thing, because it's a huge topic that needs to be demystified. And in conversations I've had with shippers, loads of them say, I've got no problem shipping via sea freight. And in fact, that's how we used to do things. It's only recently that the demand is that things have to arrive so quickly. That means that that's less favorable, but it can be cheaper to ship via sea. Some insurance companies have no issues with it. And there are ways of doing it. As Laura has said a couple of times, and I really want to reemphasize the point of planning ahead is the way to a better sustainable practice. So if you can plan ahead, and there's no reason why sea freight can't be the primary form of transport. But yeah, more information on this coming from GCC in the coming months, so stay tuned.
Well, I think stay tuned. I think we've now come to the end of our panel time, and there's lots more to say. I know we've raised so many issues, but I hope this has got everybody thinking, everybody stirred up. And it just leaves me to say thank you very much to audience, my fellow panelists, and do join Galleries Commit, Gallery Climate Coalition. We're all one big organization, all fighting on the same side to try and really make a difference. And thank you all for joining us. And now it's time for everybody to take a bit of a break before the next panel. Thank you very much.